Well, I grew up Southern Baptist, so I guess like the epicenter of evangelicalism. Um, and I liked it. Um, I was a really nerdy kid. I got picked on a lot. I got beat up a lot. And there's a sense of belonging and purpose I had in the church that I didn't feel anywhere else in my life. And one of the really amazing things that the church does for people, especially the evangelical tradition, is introduce this idea of a God that is personal and a God that you know and a God that knows you and cares about you. And in the process of introducing this idea of a very personal God, the the spiritual practice of evangelicals involves direct encounters with God through Bible study, through prayer, through times of worship. As I was growing up, the contemporary music movement was happening in the Baptist church, fed by movements like the Vineyard and charismatic movements. So Baptists kind of took all of the mystical elements out of that because they tend to be quite stoic, and instead just put drums on stage with guitars.
V drums.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
V drums.
Absolutely. Or hot rods.
Hot rods.
Either way, not too loud, but we're going to emulate the form of that, and as long as people don't get too worked up, now we're having worship. But always in the youth room, things were a little more amped up. So I basically experienced God directly often growing up. I would feel like God was guiding me to this, guiding me to do that. I felt like when I struggled with things that I thought of as sin, that God would convict me and correct me and guide me. So his faith was remarkably personal, which was important for a kid who just didn't have any friends. And that stability I got through church anchored me and grounded me so that by the time I was a young adult, I was married, young father, deacon, Sunday school teacher, played in the worship band, like all the little check marks on the offering envelope that Baptists use, I could check all of them, right? Read my Bible daily. So I think I probably would have stayed in that bubble forever. But my dad, who was the music minister at our church, had an affair and left my mom. And when I wanted to confront him about that and what constituted a biblical grounds for divorce and what did not, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just representing my feelings or my opinion, that I gave him God's thoughts on the subject. So I went into a really obsessive period of Bible study. I basically read the Bible cover to cover 4 times in 1 year. And instead of giving me answers at the end of that year, I was an atheist. I completely lost my faith. And stayed there for a while, a couple of years. With a twist, still a deacon and a Sunday school teacher. So I didn't tell my wife, I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell anybody I didn't believe anymore. And that wasn't sustainable. My wife figured out something was going on. She could tell something was off. And she confronted me about it, and she told some people that were close to us, and before long there was this little circle of co-conspirators trying to pray me back to the faith. And I wasn't interested. Like, I liked that my wife knew I was an atheist and I wasn't divorced. That wasn't a combo I thought I could pull off.
Sure.
I liked that my mom knew I didn't believe anymore. So I thought, like, as more and more people learn I don't believe, I'm not experiencing the fallout I expected.
Right.
I just need to figure out how to be an atheist, like, publicly.
Yeah.
And but that's not what happened. I had a mystical experience about an hour and a half from here, where I was served the Eucharist, and I heard a voice that I thought was Christ speaking to me audibly. And then I saw this really bright light and felt the warmth of God a couple hours later on the beach. And that experience was so compelling and so moving that I flew back to Tallahassee and saw my neurologist and said, I think I have brain cancer. I'm hearing voices and seeing visions.
Wow.
And he said, well, tell me about these. And I told him, he said, yeah, let's get you a CAT scan. So I got a CAT scan and an MRI, and there was no brain tumor. So then I went and to the psychiatric center in our town and checked myself in. And I said, I'm having hallucinations. I'm really concerned for my mental health. They said, tell us more about that. I said, give me every test you've got, everything you can throw at me. So they did. And as far as mental health professionals can tell, there's nothing obviously off about my psychology. And so this one psychiatrist kind of talking to me about the results afterwards, asking more about the experience, she says, I don't think you're crazy, I think you're religious. So here I am, like I guess a religious atheist, and I've got to figure out like what to do with that. So I start reading my Bible again, and I find it so primitive and so insulting and so morally backward that I just can't read it. So I started studying, believe it or not, cosmology, looking in physics, astrophysics especially, for where all this came from. And at the heart of cosmology, I found a great mystery that I was comfortable calling God, but such a mystery doesn't speak to us, right, is not incarnate in the form of Christ. So I tried to figure out, like, where does that come from? So I started basically cold calling neuroscientists at universities.
Would they actually answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Asking if any of them were studying mystical experiences. And someone at a Florida university said they didn't, but they knew some people who did, and just gave me a couple names and books to look up. So I started reading books on a discipline called neurotheology, and found out there's an entire field of scholarship where neuroscientists are studying what belief in God does to the human brain. And so between cosmology and neuroscience, I found this kind of scientific basis for practicing the Christian faith, but no justification for any Christian beliefs. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I felt drawn to this, and basically science said, yeah, that's good for your brain, have at it. And so I started immersing myself in prayer again, and ultimately encountered the teachings of different Christian mystics who are less about Christianity as a set of belief statements you accept, and more about sitting in God's presence as facilitated by Christ. And that's kind of where I find myself today, this really awkward marriage between an empiricist, basically someone who believes only what they can justify with evidence, and a mysticist, someone who sits in God's presence without trying to lock it all down with words.
Yeah.
And my work has become all about helping other people that for some reason find themselves at an uneasy intersection between their worldview and a draw toward God.
That's awesome. So I want to talk a little bit, because I think it's cool. You had this encounter, I guess you could call it. It was an hour and a half from here.
Laguna Beach, California.
How did the Laguna Beach encounter differ from the encounters growing up in the church? And you know how that, you said you liked it. You liked it.
Yeah.
Like, how did those encounters, how did that differ?
Gosh, that's a great question. The experiences I had with God as a younger person were powerful. I would feel like God was speaking to me in my mind, but in a way I wasn't controlling. It didn't feel like my thoughts. It felt like it was coming from somewhere else. God would ask me to pray for someone in particular. God would tell me to which way I should go in making a decision. And sometimes I would feel something much more powerful. I remember a missionary came to our church once from Guatemala, and I literally felt like there was just a cable attached to my chest, pulling me up toward the altar when he said he thought everyone at some point in their life should go to Guatemala to share the gospel. And those experiences were powerful. As an atheist, I found plausible psychological reasons I would feel the way I did, that there were other explanations for experiences like those. The experiences I had in Laguna were different in the amount of sensory activity there was, as opposed to something happening in my internal dialogue. I heard a voice that I could place in physical space around me. I saw a light hovering in the air before me, kind of shining through it, that enveloped me. That was extremely, extremely powerful. But those experiences could still be things that happened in my brain. They're very moving to me, but I don't offer those up as some kind of an apologetic resource to prove that God exists.
Right.
The difference is the power of those experiences. They reminded me what belief in Christ did in my life in the first place. You know, when other kids bring dog feces from home and make you eat them at school during recess, when you hide bruises on your body from your parents, that much pain later in life turns into anger. So by the time I was in high school, I lost all the baby fat. I was a skinny guy, played in bands, had a lot of friends. But even in those days, I didn't believe anyone really liked me, even though I went to parties and had friends and people came to my shows. I thought it was all some kind of a big trick. And I can remember so many times, starting in middle elementary school and going all the way into my senior year of high school, I would have these vivid fantasies of walking onto the campus and committing suicide publicly. And the thing that kept me from doing that was this belief that Jesus loved me. The reason I felt so drawn to people in need, people who are suffering, people at the margins of our society and culture, was because I believed that Jesus was. And those experiences, though more powerful than the experiences I had in my youth, didn't prove to me that God is real in some way. They reminded me, taking the Eucharist that time was not in remembrance of some nebulous historical figure 2,000 years ago, but actual experiences in my life that not only changed me, but shaped me into who I am. And that light and that voice challenged me to be true to my own life story.
How is that interesting with your relationships? Like almost looking back, the people maybe that are still at the Baptist church, like, is it almost like do you feel like that they kind of lean on you? Like almost maybe you've tasted something they haven't tasted before? Or do you still feel like they keep you kind of at arm's length to where he's on a journey on all his own?
Well, you know, it's always dangerous to take a group of people and describe them as a group.
Yeah.
Because whatever narrative you tell about that group, I'd say probably most people in that group would say, that's not me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think to be fair, I'd have to talk about a diversity of viewpoints. I think there were a lot of people in my church.
Maybe close friends. Maybe
yeah, I lost a lot of close friends
who are close to you
that are just not in my life anymore. I'd say I lost an overwhelming majority of my close friendships in those years. There were some people who were not as close, who were generally supportive, said you're obviously on some kind of a journey. I don't know how comfortable I am with it, but I support you. There were some people who really started to kind of denounce me very publicly.
Wow.
And then there were some people who just, the phone never rang anymore. And it's strange because it's not like a nationwide thing. It's very localized.
Yeah.
I get invited to speak at conservative evangelical churches all the time, but never in Tallahassee, Florida, which is where I'm from. So a lot of people, my experiences and my story raises questions about their own experiences that they may not be comfortable addressing or answering. And I think then it's a natural thing psychologically to just kind of push away or, just kind of pretend I was never there in the first place.
Yeah.
I felt obviously an echo of the rejection I felt as a child. But a lot of the people, when they would kind of talk to me one last time to win me back to a right faith, people were stricken with grief, often had physical symptoms. Which, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? So part of what we do as a species is our brains are always trying to build a model of everyone we know. And the better you think you know someone, the more traumatic it is to you to be surprised by their beliefs or behavior. So I really pulled the rug out from under a lot of people who relied on me as a significant figure in their faith. So I have enormous empathy for how those people felt and how they processed that experience. There's a reason there wasn't one apostle. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like for some people, the experience of a reformed tax collector spoke deeply to them. For other people, the simple approach of a fisherman might be more profound. I am under no illusion that I am Christ, that it is my exclusive domain to reach every single person in the world.
Yeah.
Instead, I know I talk to people who want to talk, and I walk alongside people who want to walk together. I mean, we just filled up a sanctuary this weekend right here in the middle of Hollywood with people who really wanted to be there, people whose hearts had in one way or another been broken by the church. And I'm too busy with that to go tit for tat with somebody who's in a different place theologically. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of theirs. But that doesn't mean I don't honor the great work that they do. I mean, my gosh, with all these hurricanes, Southern Baptists have been the first boots on the ground, and I'm so proud of them. It doesn't mean that Baptists don't do amazing work in the world. It doesn't mean that I deny the way that God moves through their denomination. It's not my home anymore. I remember it fondly, but it's not my home anymore.